Okay, this tutorial we're going to cover steam vents and how to tame them. Now, for the time being, you can ignore this icebox here. We could use any sort of cooling source. What we're only really interested in here right now is this bit right here. This is the box we're going to use to actually tame this steam vent. Now, this one's actually won't be active for a while, and I want to test this on a more extreme vent so that you can see this working at maximum capacity. We're going to redline it. So we're going to jump over to a test map I used to test this, and we'll see how it works. Okay, this is my torture test map for this design. This was the meanest steam vent I could find. I found it on the map. There's a Mapseed website. Whoever makes that, thanks very much for it. That's an excellent resource. I'll put a link in the description. Now, this steam vent erupts with 9.9 kilos of steam, which is exceptional. The closest one I could find this was about 6.4, maybe 6.5 kilos. So this is an excellent candidate for torture testing this design. It has an average output of about 2 kilos of steam per second over its entire life cycle of active and dormancy. Now, the goal of this design is to condense all the steam that comes out of this without overpressurizing the vent. If the vent overpressurizes, we've lost steam, therefore we've lost water, therefore fail. Secondly, we want to not waste any cooling. We don't want to cool it more than we absolutely have to. If we cool it any more than that, it's basically wasted cooling or wasted energy, whatever way you want to think about it. We are just going to dump this water into devices that don't care about the input temperature. Devices with fixed output temperatures like electrolyzers. The oxygen and hydrogen will always be the same temperature. Carbon skimmers, polluted water will always be the same temperature. And oil wells. Oil wells, the oil and natural gas will always be the same temperature. So no wasted temperature. How do we do that? Well, the steam can exist up to 96.4 degrees. Down to as low as that temperature, steam can still exist in steam format. Once it hits 96.3 degrees, regardless of all other considerations, it will turn into water. Now, how does this system work? Well, first up, let's just discuss the materials we're using. The most advanced one is probably diamond. Diamond is only available in the oil biome, so you will effectively need exosuits to get your hands on it. It is theoretically possible to get the diamond without exosuits, depending on your map generation, but realistically, exosuits are going to be necessary to get the diamond. Second up, we got 400 kilos of steel to make this door. The reason we want this steel door is it has excellent thermal conductivity. The next closest material you can make a door out of would be wolframite, which only has a thermal conductivity of 15, which is just, it's useless. It just won't work for this. Now, as you'll see here, this is our icebox. We'll discuss the design of that later, but this basically has two metal tiles here. They're excellent conductors. They have two thermal shift plates made out of diamond, which is also the most amazing conductive material you'll find. This helps inject heat into these, or cooling into these tiles. When this temperature sensor detects that it's getting a little warm in here, it will trigger the door to close. Once the door is closed, the temperature can flow across and cool this area. This area here, this 12 tiles of liquid, is basically the heatsink. It's going to soak up all the heat that this vent can throw at it. You see the temperature there is 94.9 to 95. Basically, this temperature sensor is set to 95 degrees. I tried setting it to 96. It won't work. The temperature margins are too fine. You'll end up jamming the vent or overpressurizing the vent. So 95 is what we've set it to. This temperature sensor is a little bit slow on the uptake, though. It'll hit 90. Like for example, it's 94.7 here. So it takes a tick or two to update, which is why it's a little bit cooler than it should be. So this vent will start spewing out steam onto these thermal shift plates. The thermal shift plates are effectively in contact with the tiles of water beneath them because of how thermal shift plates work. The heatsink down here will soak up all the heat out of the steam, instantly condensing it, turning it back into water. Once it's turned into water, this hydrosensor here will detect when there's more than 900 kilos of water pressure in these tiles. So once the water pressure goes above 900 kilos, this liquid pump will kick in and it will pull the water out of the tank and dump it up here in a storage tank we're going to use for temperature output testing. So steam erupts, heatsink absorbs it, water falls down, hydrosensor detects it, pump extracts it. Anytime the water temperature in here rises a little bit higher than 95 degrees, this steel door will engage and it will start sucking cold in or sending heat out, and the whole system will run. So let's fire it up here. And what we're going to do is keep an eye on, or what we're going to do is keep an eye here on the water temperature. See the water temperature there at the bottom? It's rapidly gone from 95 degrees to 95.7. Let's slow this down a bit. But the further the temperature goes up, or the hotter it gets in this tile, you'll notice that it's actually slowing down. It's not heating up as quickly. It's slowly rising, but it's actually slowing down the higher it gets. It's flickering a bit there. It's almost evening out. So let's just stop this for a moment. Okay, why is that temperature not rising any higher? Or why is it slowing down at about that point? Well, it's to do with how temperature transfer works in this game. If you look down here, you'll notice this, actually let's wait till the door is closed and freeze it. Look down here, the water is 94.9 degrees. Let's just round it to 95. And the temperature over here is 96 degrees. So the reason it rose so quickly at the start is the temperature differential between here and here was quite minor at the start. It was minuscule. So the temperature didn't flow very quickly, or the cooling, the shift in temperature was not very fast. But the further the temperature went away from the 95 degrees, the faster the temperature is flowing over there. So as this was heating up, the cooling from here was flowing faster and faster and faster into the tile. For example, if we look over here, you'll notice that the temperature of the water has gone up to 96.4 degrees. This is because it's further away from this cold area over here, which means it takes longer for the cooling to travel. So if you look above it here, steam is existing quite happily. That's because 96.4 degrees, steam can still exist. So the steam over here is happily chugging along. It's even existing here as well. Well, actually, that's just popped. Yeah, and then it instantly gets absorbed by this tile. And over here, you'll notice also still vacuum, also still vacuum. That's because the water here is just cold enough, or heatsink is just cold enough to keep turning that directly into water. You can see the little condensation droplets there dropping down. Now, we'll just have a quick check of these doors here. The temperature shift plates are dumping cooling into this. That cooling is passing through this conductive metal door and then traveling over to these tiles, which are actually quite chilly here. The temperature sensor hasn't detected that it's supposed to open the doors yet, and there it does. So then it opens the doors. Temperature in here starts to rise, and when it does, the doors close again, chilling the whole thing down. Now let's just check the steam vent again, and you'll notice it's not overpressurizing. Constantly vented, every single piece of steam that came out got dumped down in here and immediately pumped over to our storage tank. Now we're going to run two lots of this, and then we'll check the temperature. I'll do that off screen, but we'll run two lots through here so that this we can get it'll hit the temperature shift plate, spread out the heat so that we can get an accurate reading of what our output temperature is. So that's basically it. Absorbs the heat, turns into water, water gets pumped out, any cooling gets injected from our icebox over here. I'll cover the icebox later. So I'll run this a second time, we'll collect the water, and we'll take a temperature reading. Back to you in a moment. Oh, just before I run this for the second time, I want to point out that once this vent stopped its activity, the door kept injecting cold until the temperature across the entire box is now reset to 95 degrees. A little bit cooler on this side. But effectively this means the whole system is reset and it's ready to go another round with the steam vent. Alright, second venting is complete. And this is the water we've been left with after two vents. And you'll notice it's 95.9, 95.9, 96, 96. Let's just call it 95.9. Target temperature was 96.3, so this is pretty good. We're about where we want to be. Now, with that said, you have to bear in mind this is an exceptional steam vent. It's quite hot, so it's actually heating up the water more than, say, a weaker steam vent would. Anything that, say, it's a steam vent that it only outputs 0.5 of a kilo of steam per second over its lifespan, it's not going to heat up the water as much, which means the output will be cooler. So it won't be quite as efficient. But I like to make these designs robust and pretty much a one-size-fits-all scenario. This should effectively work for pretty much any steam vent you can throw at it. Like I said, this is an exceptional steam vent. However, if you do encounter a steam vent that's hotter than this and the system is actually jamming, as in the vent is overpressurizing, what you can do is set this to 94 degrees. If you set the temperature sensor here to 94 degrees, this thing will eat steam vents for breakfast all day long. It won't care. You will have to provide more cooling. It will be less energy efficient. But at 94 degrees, this thing just will not care anymore. However, we want to strive for efficiency here, so 95 degrees would be your preferred temperature setting unless you're facing an absolute monster. If you do face an absolute monster, please send me the map seed. Next up, we're going to cover the actual icebox here. This icebox, pretty standard design, but I'll cover it. There's multiple ones I've used, but this one is my preferred method for energy efficiency. I completely forgot to mention this gas pump. This gas pump is in here to create the initial vacuum. We want to turn these 10 tiles in here into a vacuum so that the cooling can be applied more accurately. Now there are ways using oxygen or lighter gases to actually cause the steam to never overpressurize, but we're trying to stay within the developer's intent here. So that's why we're vacuuming out this area to improve the cooling so we can prevent overpressurization. Now one thing I normally don't remove these because once I've created the vacuum, you'd have to create water locks to try and get in here and out if you want to service the part. So normally I make this a non-serviceable part. So you want to stick in a switch or some sort of control for this so you can turn it on until it's vacuumed out, and then once it's vacuumed out you turn it off. If this is still active when it's venting steam, it'll try pulling the steam out of there. You'll end up with broken pipes. It's not worth it. So just make sure you have some way of turning it off, or you're going to have to put in a water lock and go in there and remove it afterwards. That's the whole purpose of that vent, if you were wondering. Now, as I mentioned before, you don't necessarily have to use this exact type of icebox design. There's multiple ones out there. I'm just using this one because it's pretty simplistic to set up and it's zero energy requirements. You could use an aqua tuner or you could use an anti-entropy nullifier. There's lots of different choices. Now, how does this actually do its job? Well, first off, you need to know how many Wheeze warts you need to cool the steam vent. Now we only need to cool the steam by 15 degrees. That's the maximum we're going to be aiming for. So I did some math. It was painful, but one Wheeze wort can cool steam by 15 degrees. It can cool exactly 191.5 grams of steam by 15 degrees per second. So all you have to do, analyze your steam vent, take these details, and there is a website out there. You'll have to Google it. Oxygen not included vent calculator or geyser calculator. It's one or both of those will get you there. Kudos to whoever made it. Excellent resource. Thanks for that. I'll put a link to that one in the description as well. So once you know exactly what the output is, this vent is 2030 grams. Divide that by 191.5 and that gave me 10.9 something Wheeze warts. So we rounded up to 11. This is a pretty beastly one though. Most of them will be somewhere between 3 to 6. So once you know that, you basically put in a layer of Wheeze warts and you have to make sure they're in hydrogen. You see, the cooling of Wheeze warts is completely dependent on the gas they're in. They will cool whatever gas they're in by 5 degrees. So what you want to do here is, where's the hydrogen? The hydrogen has a specific heat capacity of 2.4. This is the highest heat capacity of any gas. All the other gases don't even come close. I mean, oxygen is 1.005. It's half. So if you had these in oxygen, they would actually provide only half the cooling. So what you really want to do is have these in hydrogen. So I usually put in a high pressure vent here. I pump in hydrogen, have this vent pull out whatever gases are in here. All the hydrogen gets filtered back into a filter and dumped back into here until eventually there's nothing left but hydrogen. Now, what is this water for, you might be thinking? Well, that water is down there to act as a sort of a cool battery. Because what's going to happen here is we've calculated exactly how many Wheeze warts we need to cool this vent over its entire life cycle. That life cycle includes active periods and dormant periods. So during the active period, this is going to be producing more heat than the Wheeze warts can handle. However, during the dormancy period, we can bank up some chill so that when the active period comes around again, we'll have that banked chill to tide us over. Now, the hydrogen, great as it is not actually as good at water, at storing temperature. Thermal shift plate, water. As you can see, the specific heat capacity of water is 4.179, which it's not quite double that of hydrogen, but on top of that, you can store 1,000 kilos of water in a single tile. So this one tile of water can store about 30 to 40 times more temperature, or more cooling in this case, than the actual 3 tiles of hydrogen above it. If we did not have this water here, what would happen is about 10, 15 cycles into this vent dormancy period, all the hydrogen would hit about minus 60. And once it hits minus 60, these Wheeze worts would hit their lowest operating temperature and they would all shut down and all that potential cooling would be lost. And then we'd have problems when this vent became active again. But because of the water's there, it acts like a battery. It stores up the cooling. Now, if we didn't have this water here, because we have this water here, I should say, this probably won't cool down below about 0 degrees, maybe minus 10 during the dormancy phase. Even if this turns to ice, the cooling is still there. When it thaws out, it'll all go back to liquid again. So this cools constantly, 365. Every time the vent goes dormant, the chill gets stored in the water and the hydrogen. And then when the vent becomes active again, it all gets dumped back in. This ensures that this can run constantly and keep up with this vent for the entire life cycle of the game. One last thing, when you're initially setting this up in game, you may have your vent just about to come out of dormancy. That could be a problem because you wouldn't have enough cooling banked up to actually handle it. So what you can do to combat this, or what I like to do, is when I'm first setting these up, I'll put a row of temperature shift plates, usually along here, and I will make them out of ice. I will make temperature shift plates all along here out of ice. That's 800 kilos per temperature shift plate. And all of that ice will melt and drop down into the bottom here. Now, if you want, you can just actually calculate the whole thing and make all the temperature shift plates out of, make more temperature shift plates out of ice, enough to fill this entire row. And that would ensure that you have all the chill you need at the start so that there's no downtime. The other option is you can just eat the loss, basically. For example, this is active for about 2/3 of the time, inactive 1/3 of the time, which means even though this will not have banked up enough chill to completely take all the steam in, you'll get roughly 2/3 of it. Roughly 2/3 of the steam will still get absorbed because the Wheeze worts will actually allow you to get that many. And once it gets past its first active period and goes into dormancy, you'll bank up enough cold at that point to keep up with the vent for the rest of its lifespan. Oh, and one last thing, I have a design I want to try it for metal volcanoes. So if you have a really high capacity metal volcano, one with a lot of iron coming out of it. Iron is the most dangerous one to work with. If you've got one of those, send me the map seed. I'd be interested in testing it on the design I've got running. As always, try out the design, retest it, redesign it a little bit differently every time. Maybe you can come up with something a little bit more efficient.